And we are live. Hello and welcome to the first week of Unpacking More Equal Animals. My name is Brandon Lovejoy. I'm joined by other members of the Eden community who will all introduce themselves momentarily. I'm just a OG blockchain enthusiast and interested in more equal animals, and I'm just motivated to show up and try to extract the core concepts from this book and see what we can do. Yeah, this is going to be an 11-week series, and I'm sure we'll tease out more details of what it is we're trying to do as we proceed. We don't have a top-down order now; it's clockwise. So to my right, it's Chris, I think. Chris, take it away.
Yeah, so that's right. Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Barnes. I'm an Eden member. That's basically my relationship to all this, and a big fan of the principles inside of Dan's book. I've actually not fully read this book, so this is a great opportunity for me to, I've listened to it. However, now I'm going to get a chance to read it in sort of as we go through these 11 weeks. We're doing roughly 20 pages at a time. And so for me, this is a great opportunity to actually go through it in detail. And yeah, hopefully we'll pull out some great tidbits and summaries in our unpacking of these more equal animals. Go ahead, Jesse.
Hey, everyone. I'm Jesse Jaffe. I've been an EOS Genesis community member, recent Eden member, and I saw the idea in Dan's voice post, and I thought, my first thought was just, this is a super fun way to reach consensus. Read the book, super complex ideas. So, we want to unpack it, and I think it'd be really valuable for everyone.
And I'm Joshua Seymour, fellow Eden member, and my interest here is really, I want to, continue helping to idealize the conditions that will ultimately bring us the cure to things like poverty and stagnation and tyranny, of course, and even aging, to be honest, while simultaneously actualizing those conditions with unique business and social and political systems. And I think what we have here in More Equal Animals is some very key components, which of course is why we're all here as far as Eden on EOS goes. It really is a combination of all of those kind of systems, but particularly with emphasis on political and social systems. And I'm hoping that the outcome of this book is that we can help organize or better organize random breezes of individuals into hurricane forces of organizations. And I don't know if we don't do that, I'm a little bit concerned about what might happen. So I think it's very imperative that we unpack the principles in books like this and actualize them.
I like it. Random breezes into a hurricane force.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, Brandon, you want to go first? So basically, we're going to go through bits of the book. I'm going to share a screen here, which has some highlighting done. And as we go through, I will highlight more.
Awesome. Oh yeah, we're starting with the forward. Let's just raise our hand and go around. I actually don't have anything highlighted from the forward or the introduction, so I didn't do my homework in that sense. But
okay, well, I can go. I mean, I've got it on the screen, and this is what I highlighted. So the forward is interesting. I think Maloney goes into some interesting concepts here about the difference between the meanings of intelligent, smart, logical, and wise, which I think he's got a neat look at it. But what I found most interesting, and what ideally we can take away from this whole series, is his comment here about sometimes someone can make an argument so compelling and complete that people don't even have to consider it. They just accept it as an inexorable truth. I pronounce that word wrong sometimes. Inexorable. It's not how you say it. So, and just for those, inexorable, impossible to stop or resist, inevitable, not capable of being persuaded by entreaty, relentless. So if when we're done this, we have a summary of More Equal Animals that is basically an argument that's so compelling and complete, people don't even have to consider it, they just accept it, that yes, that's how democracy should be done. What we're doing currently doesn't work. And now this summary, this is undeniably a better way. So I thought that was an interesting piece to highlight from the forward. And then there was one other spot that I thought was cool. Again, as someone's going to dive into this sort of summary and recognizing that now here Dan has created a solution that strips power from special interests, big corporations, high finance, and the media, and returns it to the voters, empowering every individual. So for me, those are kind of two key points from the forward. Josh, anything you want to add?
Yeah,
different spots.
I actually liked how he sort of defined like being smart, having wisdom. What he says, it's kind of above the part that you had highlighted there. It's like the sort of like the third paragraph in indentation. He says, smart is the ability to use that previously acquired knowledge and apply it to create solutions to problems you encounter in everyday life. And then on the next page, he's going into logic and stuff, but then I liked the part on wisdom here. Wisdom is acquired through direct experience or the observation of the experiences of others. A smart person can come up with a plan using their intelligence and logic, but a wise person can also foresee the consequences. So I guess to me, it's sort of pointing out that maybe there is a distinction between being smart and being wise, and wisdom is a little like more depth to the intelligence, and the usefulness of that is that you can really avoid, maybe undesirable consequences or circumstances. I think those are the only things I pulled out of it. It's a pretty great forward. It's really short, actually.
Yeah. Chris, if you go to back to the second highlight that you highlighted, we're not going to get to it in this call, but just reading the book, something that I question is the ability to neutralize the media with this system. I'm not so sure about that. So potentially it's a theme going forward.
Where is
a solution that neutralizes, a solution that strips power, and then you're saying from the media. This won't strip power from the media. That's a good, interesting point.
Yeah, but it may empower communities of up to 10,000 people to become a hurricane force of independent, individual controlled media.
Yeah, I think
that drowns out and magnetically draws people away from the media that's causing problems in their lives.
Yeah, it's a very roundabout sort of way, but through getting rid of special interests, influence in society should bring the media in check over time, not right away.
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
Interesting point.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jesse.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess, this is the first time we've done this for any of the live people who are watching this, and we haven't quite figured, like, should we...
Yeah, let's move
take
on.
the highlighted stuff afterwards and just move on to the next section, and we'll just, whatever we highlight becomes pieces we'll pull out and create. These are the highlight summaries.
Yeah, because we're going to create a document, right?
Yeah. And, also, I think we're just less concerned about the forward and introduction. Like, they're nice kind of containers for what it is that we're studying. And the introduction is a little more salient, I'll say, being something that Dan wrote to introduce the thing. So we'll probably end up pulling a lot more out of here. But when we get to the Tyranny of the Status Quo, chapter 1, that's where I see we're going to need to do a little bit more heavy lifting. But on to the intro?
Yeah. I've got some highlights, but Brandon, do you have any spots that stand out to you that I should turn a color?
No, I'll jump in a minute. You guys go.
Okay, well, I'll read this. I think this is this is also on the back of the book. Imagine for a moment a democratic society governed without party politics, politicians campaigning, mudslinging, identity politics, ballot stuffing, gerrymandering, incumbent advantage, special interests, or debates with the authenticity of a WWE wrestling match. That sums it up in a nutshell.
Yeah, I like the end. I think Dan does a really good job of providing analogies and kind of inserting some humor into this. So it just kind of makes the read more enjoyable than maybe it otherwise would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit of a mission statement too at the beginning. He says, in this book, we will explore new democratic processes designed to encourage consensus building rather than division into political factions. Then he goes into the bit you just read, but I see that as kind of like a good bullet point to pull out.
Yeah. I'm wondering, what we've noticed in the incarnation of Eden now on EOS is that party politics, like I wonder how different that, or politicians campaigning, for example, I feel like that's tough to get away from, because even in Eden, we're going to see people campaigning. And it's not parties per se that they're campaigning on, but there is going to be where people who are moving or looking to be elected or delegated responsibility, authority, and funding in Eden on EOS, they're going to benefit from campaigning.
I don't think there's anything wrong with
platform.
campaigning. Is he mentioning anything about campaigning? I think it's just the party, issue, the division into political factions.
Well, we're not politicians, maybe. He's saying politicians campaigning.
Yeah, well, that's the definition of politicians, though. We are.
There's also an issue with like politics, political structure isn't a bad thing. There's just like two different operating systems, and the one that we've had is like the one where the ruling class, are the politicians in most cases. So I think people might have some stigma about the concept of a political party or what a politician is, and maybe the context of what he's saying here is in sort of the anti-civilized world that we live in. It's that definition of politics that's not very helpful. But in the case of Eden, like, we're campaigning to be elected if that's what you're doing. If you're a candidate going into an election, ahead of the election and during the election, you're presenting yourself to become an elected official. That kind of sounds like a politician. I wouldn't like to consider myself personally a politician, but probably I just also have some stigma about the word. So maybe as the intro kind of gets into, like, we sort of have to let go of preconceived notions and just kind of take on what's being said here with an open mind. But that's a good point, Chris, trying to apply this to what's happening directly with Eden on EOS right now. Are there political parties forming? Are there politicians campaigning? And is it already going the direction that Dan didn't quite intend in that regard? Or is that actually totally okay and acceptable because it's a different game theory?
Well, I think that's what we're trying to find out. I mean, the principles in More Equal Animals and the fractal democracy process itself is designed to resist all these pitfalls that we've seen in traditional politics. So we're going to figure that out in real time rather than getting into the what ifs and what will befall Eden. Maybe let's try and just get through the introduction here with any other really good things you guys want to.
On that same page, I highlighted the sentence, political consensus is the process by which people reach agreement about the nature and structure of government.
Mm-hmm. I have that too.
And I think that sort of summarizes what I was saying. Like, political consensus is not a bad thing. Having a system of governance is not a bad thing. It's just normally what we have is not a very good version of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you catch that, Chris, for highlighting purposes, political consensus?
Well,
Sure.
I'm getting hung up on my politics thing because when I read this, I had to kind of slow up and be like, huh, interesting. Are we politicians in Eden? Like, are we? And we are, because we're a person who's professionally involved in politics, and politics are the activities associated with governance of a country or other area, and governance of Eden community funding kind of fits. Anyway, it's off.
Here,
Sort of.
I'll highlight
off
it.
the weeds.
I'm in there now. You can't stop me. Oh
Yeah,
shit!
no,
I
highlight
just
it.
moved the whole thing.
No, that was me. Because my screen is the one being shared. Yeah, is it this page that you were there?
I'm on the intro. How do I? Oh no, I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm gonna break everything.
Josh, which was it right here? Political consensus, is that the part?
Is the process by which? Mm-hmm.
The special interests include shadow government.
Stop.
I think it does.
With a nature structure.
Yeah.
So is that, was there more to it? Did you also, the intent of the book to provide practical approaches for improving your life and that of your local community for generations to come?
I like that part, but I didn't highlight that.
Yeah, I mean,
do like it though.
I just think, yeah, as a takeaway, that statement is it's a good foundational sort of concept to introduce, you know.
This one, the intent of the book is to provide practical approaches?
No, the first part.
It's like a definition of political consensus.
Okay. Political consensus process by which people can reach agreement about the nature and structure of government. Yeah. I think that makes total sense. And then, yeah, I've got, once the principles are understood, I will present a strategy to realize many benefits of applying the philosophy to your life today without having to get everyone else in the world on board first, which is interesting because that's one of the things that kind of you think about as you read this book is how can you actually make this a reality? This seems like almost too impossible. It's just too big of a thing to do.
Yeah, I highlighted that one too. I highlighted it starting at strategy. But yeah, the idea of being able to do something like this without having to get everyone else in the world on board first, that's very empowering kind of feeling. And for those who aren't familiar with the book, you'll see as we get further into it, and if you're not familiar with Eden on EOS, there's this part of the game theory is something called Dunbar's number, which is part of what he's talking about here in the intro.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's some good spots from the first page.
Yeah, and the list of questions he asks are like worth, setting aside for later. Is government necessary? If so, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
All the way down to the end of that paragraph on the next page.
Yeah. I've got it here. Did anybody read it yet?
What?
For the listeners?
No, I can read
this
it.
Call. Yeah, go ahead. Give that a read.
Is government necessary? If so, how should one judge the legitimacy of government? Where do governments gain their power? How do we even agree upon the purpose and powers of government? Assuming we agree on a purpose, who is the judge of the effectiveness of a government in pursuing that purpose? And how do we fix a government which is failing to perform the job it was created to perform? These are the questions I seek answers to and invite you to join me.
I will accept that invitation, Daniel Armour.
Yeah, that's the invitation.
I like it.
And then the next two paragraphs are like the world is on fire, and this is a scene from Lost, which is instructive, but I would think. I like the next paragraph where it says, this book is my call to stop the fighting and find a way to live together. It is time to realize that we all have a common interest in peace, prosperity, and a future for our families. I am asking you to take a moment and let go of your ideologies and triggers and approach this book with a humble spirit and an open mind. I like the commonality, the note of commonality.
And I highlighted the first sentence in the next paragraph, which I think is pretty much just a one-sentence way of saying the same thing. Consider for a moment that everything you think you know just might be wrong or incomplete. But it's kind of the way it's being said in the paragraph preceding it is a little more open.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of prepares you for it. Did a pretty good job writing this, gotta say.
Yeah, it may be interesting as we go through this to recognize this is something that I thought was another way. Maybe it'd be good to highlight those things going forward.
Yep. Where our preconceived notions are being challenged.
Right.
We're being triggered and we get angry on live stream. What the? Cool. Anything else? So this is a good way to do it. I'll just, as I scroll, I can highlight bits that you guys like.
Yeah.
Bits are already here.
Well, he's asking a lot of questions in the introduction that he then goes on to answer in the book. So as a Socratic method sort of introduction, it's kind of nice. Like after that bit about consider that everything you know might be wrong or incomplete.
Yeah.
He says, I can assure you that your ideological enemies have some legitimate concerns that you would be a fool to ignore. There's a bit of wisdom there. And then he asks, how do you plan to deal with those whom you disagree with if and when your faction / party gains power? How exactly will you respond if they resist? Will you resist if your faction loses power? If we don't open the lines of communication and establish a new way of working together, then the fighting will eventually escalate to slavery and genocide. Hopefully, we have enough shared humanity left to agree that slavery and genocide are undesirable outcomes.
Right.
So you could summarize this whole thing as like, we're either going to need to work together or devolve into more fighting and chaos, essentially, / slavery and genocide.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Everything you know might be wrong, so maybe no.
I would think so. I guess I'm optimistic that we do have enough humanity to avoid a disastrous solution. And it seems like, at least from my perspective, we argue and fight over things that are not as big as maybe other things are. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It seems as the society progresses that what we fight over becomes less and less important.
I would add to that, like speaking about devolution, evolution seems to take place when there's like survival pressure, when there's enough like social pressure on, the human organism, like then we go to the next level, it seems like. Which is really reassuring, I guess, about the humanity.
Nature in general, right? That's part of the survival of the fittest concept, is who can respond to the pressures.
Yeah, so you're saying that we need to create pressure, even if the issues are maybe not as intense, as a way to advance ourselves.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like if you have a kid or whatever, like do you coddle them and helicopter parent them so they have no pressures and no adversity throughout their life or their early formative years of their life? Does that yield the best outcome of a human?
No, you got to throw them to the wolves.
I would argue you got to make it tough. Yeah. If you spoil them too much, then they enter the real world, and where it turns out they don't have the bubble wrap in place because you're not standing over them, and good luck. It's like I noticed this with the idea of looking at socialism is kind of has a resurgent, right? And I have some friends who are openly Marxist, basically, and they think that socialism just hasn't been done right. But we're smarter now; we can do it right. And it's like, how do you? And I ask them, okay, when you raise your kids, do you raise your kids such that they end up being entirely dependent on you or the state, for that matter? Like, is that how you raise your kids, to be dependent by nature? Or do you raise them to be independent and their own humans and to think for themselves and to struggle and persevere and succeed? Which I think is pretty obvious. Most people, when they think of it in that context, be like, no, I raised my kid to be independent and a strong human. That's kind of a goal, right? So, but meanwhile, you're willing to do that for your kid and then recognize once you're growing up, you just want to give into the state and accept socialist top-down rule. It seems kind of counterintuitive to that idea.
Yeah, since we're still in the intro, it's worth mentioning that for those who haven't read the book yet, dependence versus independence and like where you at on that scale is a big part of what the book is pretty much about, and gaining more independence. But it might, in the spirit of like working together, it might also be worth mentioning that we are by default very interdependent. And I think that interdependency is where that social pressure just inherently is always there that causes the evolution. So it's just like another reason to be very optimistic that we can do it.
And we've been joined by the illustrious Mike Manfredi. Hello, sir.
Manfredi.
Manfredi.
You're muted, Mike.
He's muted. He's joined us, but he's not going to talk.
Oh, the illustrious can't unmute himself when needed and can't have his calendar straight. Mike Manfredi. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Hey, you know, we've been just like dragging out the intro as long as we could, hoping you'd show up in time for the tyranny of the status quo.
There you go. Well, sorry, guys, but
we all introed ourselves. If you want to just say hi and introduce yourself real quick.
Sure. Hi, my name is Mike Manfredi. I work for Clarion. I hold various roles there. I am a software engineer, web front end by training. I am a huge fan of this book. I've read it numerous times and picked it apart a lot, and I'm super excited to be part of this conversation.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we're just
slavery and genocide, Nuno has pointed out. Yes, those are problems.
To which I reply, not good. In Portuguese.
Wow. Yeah, with all the letters. Okay, so where were we, Mike? And just so you know, basically we're sort of rolling through the book and highlighting the bits that stand out to us, so we can then pull that out later and create a sort of a document of highlights, and maybe
perhaps a document that lists the thesis of each chapter. That'd be a great idea if somebody ever did that.
Welcome to the team.
Yeah,
so,
as well as maybe some social posts and maybe some posters for making some merchandise out of the book.
We can make some like good like those old propaganda posters, like
yes
style. Like,
I knew you were with me, Lovejoy. Big red sun.
Yeah. So we're on page 8, going on to page 9 on the introduction, and we're just trying to before we get into the first chapter, pull out any like kind of guiding statements or questions. He asked a lot of really good questions in the introduction. Just to put those out and get those highlighted. So we kind of went over the last.
This interesting so as people are going to read, you know, if we're creating a dozen-page summary of this entire book in the early bits, if you know the first principles have allowed Dan to integrate the truths buried within capitalism, libertarianism, socialism, Marxism, Christianity, and atheism. So it's interesting because as a new reader, you'd read that and probably one of these applies to you. So it certainly would. Okay, how do you integrate all these things together? Because I'm a capitalist and I don't agree with socialism. So how have you integrated those truths to become unified, or Christianity versus atheism?
Yeah, and he says somewhere in the intro that he's been a libertarian. He's been through the whole circle of from libertarian to socialism. I think he's researched all of that, so you know, he can potentially relate to everyone's biases there.
Yep.
I think also early on in the book like this, I think it's worth calling out these words typically for most people don't have really sharp meanings, really definition, from the dictionary kind of definitions. So when he says integrate aspects of Marxism, that sounds terrible to certain people who have picked a camp and know their terms. But I think he does a phenomenal job of looking at, like, well, what do we mean when we really hand-wavily use a term like communism? What do we really mean, and what does libertarianism miss that maybe the allure of communism addresses? So I think he's dealing with them in a more common way that is not obvious to people who have their definition straight and are clearly in one of these camps.
And maybe this John Dewey quote from Ism Schism would be nice to just like toss in as a preview, because we're going to get into a whole chapter on why all these ideologies are inherently limited and why we need an approach that doesn't, get trapped by any particular ism. But this John Dewey quote, I'm jumping way ahead now, but it's just good. For in spite of itself, any movement that thinks and acts in terms of an ism becomes so involved in reaction against other isms that it is unwittingly controlled by them. For it then forms its principles by reaction against them instead of by a comprehensive, constructive survey of actual needs, problems, and possibilities. John Dewey.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I broke the whole format.
What the hell?
Jesus loves it.
You're right, though. A lot of isms in here.
Yeah. Christianism.
They need to redo that word.
I'm a Christianist. Anyway.
So back to here.
Yeah, the same thing that you have there. When two people have a disagreement, they can either fight to the death, live and let live, or agree to a process of dispute resolution. And I even highlighted the other part of it too. But I think this was really good because it highlights why would you want a process for dispute resolution, and what are the consequences of not having it.
Right. We either
are those the only options? I was thinking about this when I was reading this, and I was trying to think: is it just that simple? If you have a disagreement, it's one of three choices. You're fighting to the death, living and let living, or agree to a process of dispute resolution. It almost is that simple. I was thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, that sounds like.
Well, I mean, death is maybe a metaphorical. Maybe it's a death of a friendship, or death of something more figurative.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so it's you can't let it go.
Nuances to what
we can't move beyond this, or okay, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to worry about it. Or hey, we have a process to actually solve this.
Yeah, I think that covers the whole spectrum of all possible outcomes. Personally, I don't know what else you would add to that. I mean, that gets to the core of so many problems that I find when I talk to people that are super ideologically motivated, that really want the other side to lose or want the other side to be wrong. I'm like, well, if you can't reach some sort of, ground level communication, with this other party, then your choices are either ignore them or fight them. It's like you either have to give up or fight, unless you want to meet them and communicate with them. That's your only other option. So
I just re-highlighted this bit because I'm realizing this applies to so many conversations, right? Everything is so. Prior to this, the very words capitalist, socialist, and communist mean vastly different things to different people, which you mentioned earlier, Brandon, and maybe Mike as well. But everything has become subjective, and in the process, our ability to communicate and compromise is rapidly declining. so true, right? We'll talk about something, and meanwhile, we might be talking about entirely different things. Like the words we're using might have like not the same meaning, and meanwhile, we're going to argue about meaning, and we're not even on the same plane. Like no wonder there might be a lot of inability to reach consensus if we're not even meaning the same thing in the words we're trying to reach consensus on.
Right.
Well, Chris, I also highlighted that, and I was thinking everything has become subjective, implying that in the past things were more objective. And I'm not sure if that's true. I don't know. Were things more objective in the past?
I would say certain things were, right? There were certain values that were held more. Objective might be a shortcut for the word universal, right? I think there was more agreed upon things in society, and that made things seem objective because enough people agreed on them. I think now everyone's got their own opinion, like completely unique on every other topic, fight with everybody.
Is that because of the internet, the democratized information?
Oh, that's because of how I've been trained to think, right? There's power in groups, and if you teach everyone to be incompatible with everyone else, you don't have groups, and the people don't have power. And if the people don't have power, the default power has power.
Mm-hmm.
So is this like is there maybe a deliberate attempt to introduce doublethink?
What?
In
Conspiracy theorist.
Controlled indoctrination camps? Because I mean, the schooling system is fairly the schooling is fairly kind of indoctrinative, if that's a word in its nature. Right? So maybe that's interesting.
Well, yeah. Our whole society is built on an us versus them kind of, mentality. Like, I mean, coming from a U.S. centric perspective, like every child pretty much is raised within the context of like our team versus their team. We get it really early. So,
well, I think that if there's power in groups, then the process of dispute resolution becomes critical, right? Do you enter into a water cooler debate at work with some kind of, obviously usually implicit social agreement on how you're going to resolve disagreement, and then you can have something that we used to call discourse. And I'm not quite old enough to use we there, but there's this thing called discourse, and civil discourse, even better if you need the extra adjective, and that you either have rules for that, they govern a reasonable discussion, or you just have personal insult and a non-productive conversation.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of what we have now. And the better your process of consensus, I think the more people you can group together. The more you have people agreed to a better process as well. Otherwise, you're a bunch of individuals arguing.
Yeah, and that really comes down to like what the individual like wants out of the deal, Like if people come to the realization that working, coordinating together in groups is optimal, then they might make choices about how to conduct themselves that might tend to lead towards that outcome. Whereas if people don't even believe that there is such a possibility, then they'll just say, well, screw you then, and walk away from the water cooler, and there'll be awkward silence for the rest of the day in the office, and they'll just like agree to disagree with each other and not come to any agreement and just further polarize. But yeah, we almost need an agreement that we need agreement that agreement is optimal, or, I don't know if agreement's the right word, but some sort of agreement to a consensus process is optimal versus everybody just taking sides,
I'll give an example of that from a recent conversation. I met a guy recently, had a great conversation, and he said, I have multiple brothers, and we would have these deep debates. We would argue, for dominance, for knowledge, for fun. We would have debates. And he said, but it was never personal. At the end, he was still my brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we've lost. You don't, oh, but he's still my coworker. Oh, he's still my friend. Like there's a whole lot of, I have had relationships blow up over ideology.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, wait a minute, guys, is the friendship, is the brotherhood more important, or is the ideology more important? That's I don't know. That's one of those things I think used to be more objective.
Yeah, and further still, never mind brotherhood or friendship, just humanity. Like, we're all humans. We were all once little fat babies. Like, you know, like, even though we don't agree with each other now, surely as a baby we would have got along. So where did the diversion happen?
Right.
So here he kind of says, the crisis we face today is a crisis in our existing dispute resolution process, our democratic process. We no longer trust our politicians, our political process, to reach consensus in an agreeable way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting statement. We no longer trust it. Do we? I mean, maybe do a lot of people still kind of trust it? That's kind of an open question almost. How many people actually do think that the current, like, if you're a fan, if you're a Democrat, then you think it worked just fine this past time around? And
well, but then you change your opinion 4 years later. It's like,
right? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think if you looked at the recent Gallup polls in terms of like trust in government, there's one out recently. I could pull it up. It's trust in institutions, and usually the military is like the top thing that people trust in terms of like they take an oath. I trust them to protect and uphold the Constitution and defend the country, and then it goes down from there, like police, you know, Congress, da 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 da. Like, and by the time you get down to like civil servants, it's pretty low. There's not a lot of confidence or trust in.
Mm-hmm. He talks about Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul, I think, in chapter 1. So I think when it comes, especially to third parties, that I think you'd probably find a consensus that people do not trust that a third party would have a chance of winning.
Mm-hmm.
Which is right here. We, the people, have lost control of our government, which has been captured by an elite few pulling the strings behind the scenes. These elites can only remain in control by fostering division and preventing consensus building. That's
I highlighted that
statement.
one too.
Yeah,
it's very sobering.
And it begs the question a lot. I mean, there's a lot there. Yeah, who are these elite? Who are the elite? Who are these people? Are they the obvious ones, the ones that we think? The one that if you asked 10 people on the street who are the elites, would they all have the same answer? And if so, is that the right answer? Or the people maybe we don't even see? I like the idea of the elite few pulling the strings behind the scenes. The idea that perhaps those who are really in charge, we don't even know their names or their faces.
I think, you know, for the purposes of this book and the purposes of generating a effective solution, like via this method, it's almost irrelevant who. But it is good to acknowledge, I think, that we live in a world where elites exert influence and control beyond and outside of any processes we might even nominally consider to be democratic.
Go ahead, Josh. The hand is up.
From a game theory standpoint, it's worth noting that in Eden on EOS and with the Eden OS software, which is based off of the principles in this book, you can't be someone behind the scenes pulling the strings, like with no face and no name per se. Well, in theory anyway. I guess we'll have to continue putting it to the test. So it is possible to devise a system where it can't be captured in this same way by an elite few pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Yeah. I think this is really meaningful, the idea that you don't know who your enemy is. And so like I like this. There's this really neat video I saw once of two Giselles, and they're in the savannah or somewhere, and they're like totally butting heads, like a male versus male territorial battle, you know, trying to show off for the ladies. And they're like doing a circle dance of banging heads. And way in the distance, you see this lion just running into, but way out there. Like they had a minute, I guess a long video, well, you know, a minute long. So there's like 45 seconds of this lion running towards them as they totally don't recognize that they are not the enemy of each other. The enemy is coming, and the lion just walks, basically just grabs one of them, and there you go. There's dinner. And it's like, so it's, if the fact that we don't know who these string pullers are, it's almost like it obfuscates who is the common enemy of society or humanity. If there's a capture and things have been, there's string pullers who are just kind of teasing us along for their own agenda. We don't even know who they are. Therefore, we can't even target them as a potential enemy. Instead, what do? We target each other.
And it's not each other. It's not like we're
not the
enemies
of each other.
Yeah.
Right. But yet we still end up fighting with each other. So is that deliberate?
I've reduced this to a question I ask everyone now. Anytime there's some political debate where somebody is on one of the sides cheering for their team, I'll say, "What do you trust politicians?" And the answer is always no. I've never had anyone say yes. Right? So you don't even have to go that deep, really. It's like, well, we know there's distrust in the system. And if you ask anyone individually, do you trust politicians? No, of course you don't. Of course you don't. Like across the board, I can name 2 or 3 exceptions. But for the most part, the answer is no. In that case, why are you cheering for either side? And I think that's a lot of what that sentence says. Like why are we at least not really clear that government isn't serving us? That's the part of that sentence that stands out to me. We should at least be clear that, well, that's not the answer. I don't know what the answer is, but that's not the answer.
Yeah.
You guys seeing this?
Yep.
This is from this year, July 14th. Gallup poll. 33% average in confidence in 14 major institutions, down from 36%. Public schools, medical system down after double-digit increases in 2020. Small business, military elicit the most confidence, Congress the least. Here's the average confidence rating for institutions from 93 to 21. It's like down at 33%.
It's never been good though. Like it's
never been more than half of people. It's never been more than 43% saying that they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence.
This is not a new problem. This is 30-year problem that is yet to have been resolved. And it just goes to show those who are in power are really good at maintaining their grip.
Yeah, and here's percent who have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence by institution. So looking at 2021, public schools, 32%, medical system, 44%, small business, interestingly, 70%, the church or organized religion, 37%, banks, 33%, Supreme Court, 36%. Yeah, criminal justice system, 20%. Military, 69%. That's probably a good thing. That's the only thing keeping us from serious trouble.
These are abysmal numbers. I didn't expect all of them to be this low.
Look, television news is even better than Congress.
Newspaper 21, television news 16. Like that's brutal. Big business 18. So
now note that this is percent of people who have, quote, a great deal or quite a lot of confidence. But that's it's a solid way to look at it, I think. Yeah. It's not like, do you have some confidence? It's, do you have a great deal or quite a lot? But yeah, no, people don't. Most decidedly do not.
Well, and given fractal democracy, look at what's high, right? Small business. That's something we can relate to.
Totally.
I know a small business in my town. Police, those are individuals. There's a police force in my town, right? These are the kinds of groups that are getting the high votes there.
And note, like the entity that with the highest degree of trust is the most under attack right now in the current economic troubles, pandemic-induced troubles, public policy-induced troubles, I should say. But yeah, okay.
So as we move through here, let me know if there's anything that you guys have highlighted. But the next one I had here was even more important than our ideologies and philosophies is our consensus building and measuring process.
Where are you?
Page.
Oh, I see. Whether you're an anarchist. 10. Okay. I'm following along on paper, even though I could just be looking at my screen.
So right. So it's just interesting that his idea, the point here is the ideologies and philosophies are secondary to the fact that we need to have a consensus building process that's effective.
Totally.
So kind of put your ego to the side here. Recognize a little pull back the hubris, have some humility, and you're not all going to agree. You're not going to be the arbiter of truth as an individual. So then what's next is, and how do you at least come to consensus with others who might disagree? Josh?
Yeah, it really just gets to the heart of the matter. And I think Mike basically summarized it a moment ago, but like in any conflict at any level, do you value the information and the storyline over top of valuing the connection with whatever human being or human beings are involved in it? And anytime you don't choose the value or the connection to the human being, then you don't resolve the conflict, and basically nobody wins. You basically repeat a pattern until you make the right choice. It seems like to me, going through any kind of creative process. So it's a value system. Do you value the process, the consensus building, and some like resolving the conflict, and the consequence of not resolving it and sticking to your own ideologies and philosophies and stuff, or the storyline of what you think is going on and all that. Nobody wins at all, ever.
Yeah, I think one of the key takeaways there is that while we may disagree ideologically or policy-wise, it's for sure that we can agree on a process. Like we should be able to agree on a process. That's the thing that everyone we should be able to find common ground on a method of reaching consensus. One would hope, and if the agreement can begin there, then everything else can sort itself out. If we can't agree on a process, then we're kind of hosed. Then we're just basically at war.
I kind of interpret that quote as if we were building a house that represented all of humanity's kind of thoughts and processes, then the process of consensus building would be the foundation of that house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has to be, and it's not just agreement. I mean, we're like circling around this. We haven't put the two words in the same sentence. It's not just agreement on the process. It's trust in the process. We have to agree on a process that we trust in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's what's missing in the current system. We agree, but we don't have trust.
Well, we agree, but like back to your hand wavy phrase, like we agree in a very hand wavy way. It's like, I'm for democracy, me too. I'm also for democracy. It's like, well, what the heck are you guys talking about? Like, what democracy are you referring to specifically? And, how democratic is it? And, so forth. But yeah,
sorry on that. The theme of labels, I think, is prominent in chapter 1. Mm-hmm. And we have an urge to label things, and that sows jealousy and hatred. And it's such a tough urge to squash. But it's certainly a challenge that this book represents.
Indeed.
Okay, so here as we move along,
I highlighted legitimate government is supposed to be derived from the consent of the governed. I thought that was a good one-liner definition of legitimate government.
Supposed to be derived from it's almost like the definition of legitimate government is that it is derived from the consent of the government. If it's not, then
it's by this definition it wouldn't be legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
And democracy is supposed to be the process by which that consent is derived.
Honestly, I would highlight everything from if we cannot reach consensus and maintain it all the way down to what you already have highlighted, in order to negotiate. Like when he says, if we
Okay.
cannot reach consensus and maintain it, then any utopia is unstable because a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. Like that's a axiomatic sort of nugget of wisdom that needs to be, in orbit around this discussion. Is like that's some Dale Carnegie stuff in a way. Like you can never win an argument. Like if we force a bunch of people to comply, they're not really participants. They're just subjects, and
In order to negotiate, you must have the ability to say no. So if you're forcing someone to comply, then you've negated or removed their ability to say no, right?
Right.
Yeah. Very good. What do you guys think?
Which one more thought on that? Which we would never allow one-on-one, right? Removing someone's consent one-on-one is a big, huge, clear no to this culture. Not right now.
Mm-hmm.
No one's unclear about that, and yet we tolerate it in groups.
Yeah, like if you were sitting having dinner with 3 people, and one of them said something that the other 2 disagreed with and found like absolutely reprehensible. If you could press a button and like a glass soundproof case would like come down from the ceiling and like lock them inside for the duration of dinner, like how many people would press the button, to like totally like lock them up and imprison them in a case of silence while you like just carried on your conversation without them. But yet that's like exactly what we do online and what we tolerate our government doing or our technocracy doing every day. But if you don't have to see it or like be responsible for it, it's okay.
Other side of the mind.
Sorry, I just came up with like another dystopian like feature for restaurants.
That was pretty Black Mirror, Lovejoy.
Yeah.
Okay, so now there's a lot of good still here, right? Society breaks down when any aspect of consent breaks down or is corrupted. That's might be worth mentioning, I suppose, without highlighting the whole book.
A lot of it's okay if we highlight a bunch now and pare it down later, because I think a lot of this either is core concepts that are going to be filled out by the chapters or good questions or sort of like axiomatic statements that are nice to have around for materials. Yeah. Like I really like that a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still phrase, partly because it rhymes and partly because it's just a truism.
Where do you see that?
There's
one?
No
a person convinced against their, is that on this page?
It's above the 3 highlights up.
Oh, okay. If we cannot reach consensus and maintain it, then any utopia is unstable because a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. Okay, yeah, that's highlighted.
Very Dr. Seuss.
Yeah. Well, we can make The More Equal Animals children's book.
That would be in it. Yeah.
It's quite the indoctrination.
Yeah. We can call it Words Are for Consensus.
Yeah.
That's
like,
good.
Like that hands are not for hitting.
He's writing a version 2. Maybe it's a kid's book.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm down.
So here we've got the rules of the game ensure that the government will evolve towards corruption and away from democratic principles. I think that's a good one. Kind of
I really want to dive into the how and the details of these two things, but that's what the book is about. So I think I'm just gonna bookmark, like, note these 2 phrases. We will be talking about these a lot more in detail as the book unfolds.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on.
Now we're getting to my background. Yeah.
I didn't highlight any of this myself.
I highlighted.
Of course, interesting. But.
I highlighted part of the sentence that says "my hypothesis." I highlighted starting at nonviolent solutions. So he says, "My hypothesis is that nonviolent solutions to secure our rights against public and private criminals would be incredibly valuable, and therefore those who provide it can help people while also making a lot of money. So it's almost kind of defining like a market need and an industry that is really worthwhile pursuing. And
that's a good point.
And doing it with nonviolent solutions is also, I think, kind of a unique approach.
Very good. Nonviolent, key principle. Okay, anybody else have anything highlighted on this bit?
I don't know. I would just
This is cool about this Satoshi and Dan interaction. It is a pretty infamous quote, right? If you don't believe me or don't get it, I don't have time to try to convince you. Sorry. But the scalability of Bitcoin. So that was pretty good.
I'm just going to highlight this because we kind of missed it. Nuno Marcelino's in the chat. He's probably our only viewer right now, so we should pay attention to him. He wrote, "It seems that society is like a fractal of a family, and the example Dan sets about being independent, leaving family protection, to me is fascinating." To digress.
We'll get there.
Not sure that message from Satoshi aged very well.
No, but people still cite it like it was some sort of like awesome diss or something.
Meanwhile, he was. Yeah. Meanwhile, Satoshi was wrong. I guess because they've left out the context.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else here that you guys have highlighted?
I mean, I have a couple things highlighted, but it might be worth just moving on to the.
Yeah, the only thing I had was the provably honest voting. That their rules are in place. It's impossible to create provably honest voting. I was just wondering when I read that, like, I wanted to see a couple sentences, like, what are those rules? I was just like wondering about that when I read it.
Oh, that's a really good question.
Well,
right.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic.
Unfortunately, I also learned that our government effectively outlaws provably honest voting throughout mandating rules that make election tampering impossible to catch.
And this is in the context of primarily the United States.
Yeah, this is the Secretary of State of every state basically has on the books different laws about what, how an election can and cannot take place, essentially. And so effectively in every of the 50 states, like an auditable blockchain-based verifiable system is illegal for reasons that I can't exactly remember, but it has to do, basically electronic voting is illegal or against the rules. Yeah, and so they don't allow for, even though like there is a solution that exists to do this with the blockchain, it's like you'd have to convince every one of the 50 states to like rewrite the laws of their own, constitution essentially in order to get it through.
What about at the local level, like a town or a city election?
Well, there's probably some wiggle room there. I think the higher up you get, the more heat you're going to get from the state about conforming to state election laws. But yeah, it's kind of
come out with a patent. He tried to do this, I believe, and I think he's got some experience with these rules.
Yeah, well, Adam Ernst and I'm spacing right now. Nathan Hort still are developing Follow My Vote. Follow My Vote was an early project that spun out of the BitShares days, and they've been still working on provably honest blockchain-based elections, and I believe actually have an EOSIO implementation that they're working on. So yeah, I think most of the experience comes from them trying to like actively go around and campaign these, go to conferences that electoral, policymakers and stuff, but just kind of getting, running into walls everywhere they went.
So as we move through here, I mean, this is probably just worth reading. It's interesting, just as a note for Dan. As a result, so Dan's saying he applied a mental habit of challenging dogmas to all areas of life, which I think is a good habit that all of us should do, right? Why, like this idea of conformity and how it was sort of shunned to be a nonconformist. It's like, question societal norms. Why is it that we do things the way we do? Do we just accept it? I certainly teach my kids to not. I encourage them to question everything and no assumptions. And then, so as a result, this is Dan speaking, as a result, I evolved from a Christian Republican to an anarcho-capitalist atheist to a voluntarist spiritualist, and finally stumbled upon a position that integrates aspects of socialism, support for government, and, with insights from Jordan Peterson, a new appreciation for the value of Christianity. I'm curious about what the spiritualist piece was, because that's kind of ambiguous as to what
I think
that
some
can
of it
mean.
was Eckhart Tolle's
Power of Now
framework.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not exclusively, but I do remember him being a fan of Eckhart.
Okay.
This is a cool area, just kind of talking about that, like the whole broad spectrum of different, beliefs. But I honestly, this to me falls in a little bit more like the ism schism territory, where you're just kind of inviting disagreement by waving any flag in particular. You're just because this is another area where people just divide so hard along so many different lines that.
Yeah, and right there, like that divide. So here he's saying, it is through this experience that I discovered and distilled the first principles that unify these apparently contradictory philosophies and led to ideas presented in this book. Crossing the chasm. Okay.
Yeah. Critical thinking, no dogma.
Tyranny of the status quo. Look at this angry guy.
Nice. Mr. Yuck sticker.
The first thing I have highlighted here kind of goes back to what we just covered with those diagrams and stuff, that a legitimate government would trend toward a 70% approval rating or more.
Yep, I have that.
And the stats, at least for the U.S., is like really bad. Nothing close to 70 any time in recent history.
I would say highlight that.
The only thing for me about the stats, like, I don't know. Again, questioning all dogmas, and part of that is statistics. So, right. So, where do those numbers really come from? Who's answering these Gallup polls?
Are you saying they're probably like lower, like 10%?
I'm saying it. I don't know. I'm just saying they can't be perfectly accurate, because you're only sampling a certain collection of people who are willing to participate in a Gallup poll. So right there, that filters out a certain disposition of person who probably is actually less charmed with government. So it's probably even a higher representation of the true numbers, because, right?
Well,
the Gallup poll is only as good as those garbage in, garbage out, basically, right?
Well, I think in this paragraph that you're highlighting right now, Dan's not citing a specific like historical thing. He's saying it seems to him that there would be, a 2/3 plus one agreement in order to you at least get like a sort of super majority of agreement if your government is legitimate. Otherwise, if you get to the point where it's lower, then there's not even like a consent, piece is gone. So,
Brandon, it may be worth explaining where Dan comes up with his 2/3 plus one, because that's a theme throughout this, and maybe people don't know.
I'll start and then maybe defer to Mike on that one. But 2/3 plus one is basically Byzantine, fault tolerant, sort of number needed to be reached to have a strong consensus in a system. It kind of comes out of blockchain. Mike, do you want to take us further?
It's been a long time since I got deep into this, but I think the way to relate to it hand wavily is we refer to this as a supermajority in other contexts, and that 2/3 plus one number is built around if you have independent actors and you need a particular balance of agreement where you know that fraud can't or is extremely unlikely to take over, that's the number of people you need agreeing. It assumes an agreement, right? It assumes there is a way we want to operate, and to maintain that, you need this many people agreeing. But yeah, supermajority is kind of the easy way to relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
So 70% would be larger than 2/3.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if as far as like knowing the score, you could look at whatever government that you want to look at, like could be your local town or city, for example, and like what's the approval rating? If it's 70% or more, like maybe it's somewhat legitimate. But if you can't even trust the approval rating, like Chris was alluding to, then it's like, well, if you can't even trust the approval rating, what are the chances it's a legitimate government? And I actually have a question I want to throw back to you guys. With the Eden on EOS fractal democracy process, is the approval rating relevant in that kind of a model? Is there even a need for an approval rating for communities that adopt a fractal democracy process?
Well,
As a comparative sense, it would be interesting.
I mean, the approval rating's baked right into the process and with the fractal democracy. So it's like it renders a poll kind of redundant in essence, because the poll is the process of selecting representatives.
But what is the approval rating testing? Is it do we approve of the outcome of a process, or do we approve of the process? It's almost like two separate ratings that are relevant. Do we agree on the means by which we are achieving consensus? That's almost primary. That's most important. And then after an iteration has occurred, are we okay with the outcome?
Well, every iteration relies on a 2/3 plus one consensus being reached in order to select an individual to proceed to the next level. So every time it repeats, there's a 2/3 plus one consensus over an individual at some level, and then it aggregates upwards. So by definition, it's kind of always greater than 2/3 plus one consensus all the way to the top, isn't it?
In small groups. But when you look back later, because not everyone gets to vote in every round, it's just the selected small group that's voting within their group. So it'd be interesting to see, because it sounded like the consensus from the two trial elections is that everyone was quite pleased with the final result. So it'd be neat to like poll the entire population who participated after a result has taken place. And do we still have 2/3 plus one agreement that, yes, I'm happy with the final outcome?
Well,
I think that, go ahead. I think that it's baked into the process, but the person who the process selects and how they follow up with those funds, perhaps an approval rating is relevant there.
I would also say, are you delegating your personal approval rating? Right? When a number is published like this, just consider the psychological impact. Well, I don't like how it turned out, but 70% seem happy. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Right? Are you going to dismiss your own view if the number is different? I think a lot of people at least partially do. And in a fractal setup, it's more like, well, I'm unhappy and I get in my group of 6 and we're all unhappy. Well, that means something. At least where we are with the issues we face locally, we don't approve. And I think the more you get in groups and find that, I think what's fascinating about that is you get, let's say, 5 people in a group of 6 who disagree with how things have gone the previous 2 or 3 elections. Well, you vote one of those people up, and now you're delegating power higher up. So in that sense, I think the process works to promote a perspective of disapproval, of a perspective of a different consensus. Remember, it's not approval, disapproval in fractal democracy. It's different consensuses. So you're pushing someone who's going to represent the consensus of that group, represent a potential different consensus at a higher level. Now, if there's a little pocket of people of some size that's dissenting, but can never, they're the only one. So at level, D2, they never get further than that. Well, now you ask the question of, well, are we a big enough group, and do we feel strongly enough that it's worth shedding the power of the bigger group, the power of the bigger budgets, and just forming our own budget, our own community? Or is there power, can we tolerate the consensus that exists because we have the community, we have the budget, and we are producing things, and maybe it'll turn our way at some point? Mr. Lovejoy.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, this is kind of getting into chapter 2, True Democracy, where Dan makes a distinction between, he starts talking about, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Rational ignorance. And, so you could go for what's our overall, consensus on the final person that was selected by the process. Do they have a 70% approval? I think that's kind of what Chris was getting at. It's if you went through the process and then took another look at it and said, all right, does the overall body, if it was all put to a majority vote, what percent approval does the top person enjoy? But again, I think this process is designed to, and it may very well be 70% plus, or it could be less, but that method of doing things is kind of how we've gotten into the trouble where we are now with this majority vote approach tends to favor kind of irrational outcomes because not everybody is informed enough to make the good decisions at that scale, because we have rational ignorance. I don't need to know certain policy things because it doesn't affect my life, so I don't ever inform myself about them. That's an example of rational ignorance. So when you put the entire plebiscite, or whatever you call it, the entire body of the people in a vote about a particular candidate, are they all are they rationally well informed about all the issues to make a wise judgment about that candidate in all regards? Or is that process more effectively served by this sort of fractal small group stacking and delegation of consensus rather than going back to the big vote? Having said that, I think it would be interesting to see if the process does produce a candidate that enjoys widespread consensus, or widespread approval from the electorate, if you will.
I also wonder if splitting the question that way, as far as final outcome versus process, might be a little bit of a red herring, in that if you ask me two different questions and I have two different answers, maybe that shows more dissent than, look, the result isn't as important to me. I think this is generally productive, and I'm happy I really had a say. I'm really clear I had a say, and I'm reasonably happy with the outcome. Versus, well, how do you feel about the outcome itself? Well, I don't know. It's not what I would do, right? You kind of split the process in a way that I don't know is productive.
Yeah, and besides, the outcome in these elections isn't really, it's a person or a series or a collection of people. That's that's the end outcome. The decisions they make after the fact, that will be an emergent reflection of the people that were chosen. So I mean, basically you're picking the people who you think can. This is, of course, this is what we should be picking in all of our leaders, especially the ones that run countries. Are they good at achieving consensus? Because ideally, a consensus builder at the top is going to help improve trade, improve relations with neighboring countries, improve the likelihood of peace, and discourage going to war, which is when Dan talked about originally, when we have a disagreement, we're either going to live and let live, fight to the death, or agree to a means of dispute resolution. ideally a consensus builder, a strong consensus builder who does well in this process is going to be good at coming to a means of dispute resolution, because that's what establishing consensus is. Like the individual, the outcome is the person or the group of people. So, okay, as we move through here, it says here, there we go. If we are going to consider something new, we must first understand the problems with the status quo, so we do not repeat the same mistakes. So here, Dan starts to talk about the status quo of current governments and why it's not ideal.
Yeah, so what was that?
Any highlighted bits that we want to cover? So he goes into the Constitution and some of the preamble here.
Well, yeah, and again, it might be helpful while we go through this particular chapter to keep an eye out for ways we can articulate this that are not entirely dependent on referencing the failings of the U.S. political system in particular, which is a two-party system, given that we're dealing with parliaments and multiple different, attempts at democracy all around the world. But I really liked the first statement after the quote, because Dan first writes the preamble to the United States Constitution quote in there. And he says, many people will argue that this Constitution represents what we have all agreed to, and therefore should define the purpose and limits of government. This appeal to the status quo is an attractive fallacy because it relieves one of the responsibility of justifying the Constitution. I think that's a huge element, but perhaps a bit difficult to unpack. But it's the appeal to authority, or the appeal to the status quo. Like, well, we have a Constitution, and therefore that's the way we do things, and that's correct. And we're taking the position, no, as good as it is, or as good as it has been, it can't be beyond reproach. We have to be able to consider defining governance without respect to, pinning our, like, we can't deify. I mean, the Constitution's great, and I don't want to, it has things going for it, but it's like he's almost saying you can't just deify the Constitution. Simply because it's the law of the land. It's like, well, it has to be the law of the land because we agree, and if it's not doing its job, then it needs to be revisited. But then at the end of that chapter, he says, "But yeah, it's terrifying to think of, redefining it, because there's a legitimate fear that a constitution drafted by modern politicians would decimate the rights they believe the existing constitution protects. On this point, I agree. Modern politicians cannot be trusted to have the philosophical integrity to draft a new constitution." So it's a bit of a pickle that we're in.
I would say that was a little bit hypothetical to me until I heard that Chile has actually done this recently. They just had an election to vote on a new constitution. And I thought, man, who's writing this new constitution? I immediately had massive distrust, and I don't know anything about the situation. So,
well, and I may get in a little political hot water here, but when Hugo Chavez came to power in Venezuela in I think it was like way back in '89 was the uprising. Anyway, it was like in the 90s, I think. They rewrote the Constitution. They held a national referendum, and the National Assembly basically rewrote the Constitution. And I read that Constitution and I thought it was totally awesome and fascinating. And that was a really cool example of a country. Now, it did create a huge political division because it massively tilted the power away from entrenched elites, but who fought it tooth and nail from that point forward, and coups and everything after that. But it's another example of, in modern history, a country rewriting its constitution for good or ill. I liked it.
It also seems like when you're doing something like that, you're going through a warlike situation. So people who want peace, I think that's most of us, that implies that our Constitution will not be changing. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
No, I think you're absolutely right. Like, because it's a foundational element of our, supposed agreement for how we reach consensus and our process of governance. So as soon as you challenge that, yeah, you're headed squarely into like Civil War territory.
How do you get? Yeah. Lucky for us, the second last chapter is transforming society. So maybe Dan will have some ideas about how we can enact change without the need of chaos.
All right, so we're at an hour and 26 minutes.
Real quick, I was muted and talking because apparently I do that today. If you guys haven't read the South African Constitution, that was a really fascinating rewrite. That was one of the modern new constitutions that's well worth a read. It's really long, right, compared to the American. Yeah, exactly, post-apartheid. They included some really fascinating freedoms that are just fascinating to read and just consider, like, wow, I don't even know what that would mean. Like, what would that grant me? How would you back that with law? How would you arbitrate that? Like, it's a really fascinating read.
They weren't forward thinking enough to put in medical freedom, were they?
I don't remember medical. The big one I remember was freedom of relationship.
Oh,
and that was like, wow, freedom of relationship. I can relate to. I can be friends with. I can associate with. Freedom of association might be a better way to say it, but I think they used the word relationship. Yeah, really fascinating read.
Cool.
So I highlighted this George Washington quote. I mean, there's an obvious one, and it's basically an invite. Yeah, it's this one right here. Yep. It's basically an indictment on labeling things. So he's talking about geographical labeling, pretty much, and what it does is in the local, like locally, it's a conforming of opinion, and that pisses people off, and it sows conflict. So therefore, labeling is bad, is how I interpret it. But maybe we should read it. In contemplating the causes which may disturb our union, it occurs as matter of serious concern that any ground should have been furnished for characterizing parties by geographical discriminations, northern and southern, Atlantic and western. Whence designing men may endeavor to incite a belief that there is a real difference of local interests and views. One of the expedients of party to acquire influence within particular districts is to misrepresent the opinions and aims of other districts. You cannot shield yourselves too much against the jealousies and heartburnings which spring from these misrepresentations. They tend to render alien to each other those who ought to be bound together by fraternal affection. That I thought was really powerful, and
you should keep going.
Yeah, so however political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp themselves to power, pretty much, to the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. So these men, unprincipled men, can use the misrepresentations to get people on their side, to rally people, and then they can assume power that way.
Yes. If you guys had to sum up this chapter briefly, would you say, because this quote I think speaks to like the heart of it in a lot of ways. It's the unchecked factionalism that emerges from political parties. I read this whole chapter as basically an indictment of political parties. If I had to sum it up really quickly, what do you guys? How would you summarize this chapter?
Labeling. Or go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
My thesis for this chapter is actually contextualized very differently, which is the current system is messed up, and you're either in support of the status quo, explicit support of the status quo, or you need to be interested in alternatives. Right? It's kind of getting at like, if you're going to put down someone who's proposing alternatives, then you're in support of the status quo. It kind of makes this hard line of, are you seeking or are you happy? Choose one.
Mm-hmm. And if 30% of the people are the only ones, so 70% aren't happy, you would think they'd be more willing to consider disrupting the status quo.
Right.
Mm-hmm. The first bit I highlighted after what you've already got highlighted is a political party represents a parallel private government comprised of individuals colluding to gain control of the constitutional government. Such collusion undermines the separation of powers intended by the framers of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
a good one.
if I can just
prior to that, I guess we should have read. I didn't read this highlighted part. We have a system whereby most congressmen are beholden to a political party and unable or unwilling to exercise independent discernment. This happens a lot in Canada. We've seen a few members of a party start to demonstrate or express an opinion, especially as it comes to lockdowns. This has been one of those things where a few people, we spoke earlier about how many politicians do we really trust, and there's like a handful. And in this case, the very small handful in Canada are no longer part of their original party they were in. There's two of them, in fact, that I know of in most recently. So basically, it just goes to show, like, it's demonstrated. It's at the people, these representatives, members of parliament or congressmen, are absolutely beholden to the party, because if they have an individual opinion that is not aligned with the party, they become ostracized, and they get kicked out of the particular party they're in. They have to become independent members of parliament in the Canadian case. So they can't exercise independent discernment. So what the fuck? What are we voting for? Why do we vote for these people if they aren't even allowed to be them? What's the point? Like it's just yeah.
I think how George Washington's quote relates to party politics. So you're labeling, at least in the United States, we have two parties, and you're forcing people to group in one or the other, and that pisses people off. And I think that perhaps is the core of the problem, all of the conflict we have in our politics.
Which, another chapter down or paragraph down, politicians naturally end up more loyal to the tribe that put them in power than to the country.
Yeah, it raises the question: if we voted in person A, did we actually vote for person A? Or did we vote for, the people who put person A in power? That's clearly what's happening.
Put them into the position where we could even vote for them, right? Mm-hmm. So who selects the representatives we get to vote between? This is, again, what the process that comes out of this book is, that the actual process by which the individuals are selected to become potential representatives, that is completely changed. Where now we get this, column A, column B, you pick, go ahead. But it's a pre-selection, not an election. You just get to pick which flavor you like of the pre-selected, ice cream that you got in front of you.
You're jumping ahead to page 18.
Lovejoy, I'm gonna point you back as we continue to highlight stuff to your we are at our time comment. I'm going to vote for we're at our time. You guys can continue if you want me to drop, but you sounded like you were about to wrap up, so I'm just checking in.
No, I didn't really want to wrap. I kind of want to get to this chapter, but I mean, because it's not that much longer.
3 pages.
But
you can hop off mic if you need to. We understand.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll keep the home fires burning, but stick around as long as you can. My goal for this is to do it in 90 minutes. You know, I figured the first one is going to be a little crazy, so we just passed 90 minutes.
95 minutes right now. Yeah, we're 95 minutes.
I'm willing to go 120 minutes, personally.
Yeah, let's try to finish. Maybe we can pick up the pace here and just highlight.
I got something. So I'm reading the Kindle, and Kindle has certain passages that are the most highlighted. So there was one passage in here that was the most highlighted, and it was, you cannot outlaw political parties. You must design a system that makes them impossible to form in the first place. I'm not sure where that is.
Is that way further ahead? What page is that?
Right here. I also highlighted it. It's right here.
Yeah, so that's like the Pareto principle.
I am in line with the consensus.
Yeah. Yeah, that just reminds me of the Pareto principle that Dan talks about a lot. And so yeah, that was the most highlighted.
And this came up a lot. I think I'd heard this one being spoken about a lot in Telegram too. This idea of it makes them impossible to form. And then people were, some of the Dan haters were saying, well, look, they're already forming in Eden. People are forming, right? So it's failed. Look, your book's failed.
Again, like
kind of worried.
Well, if you dumb down definitions, you can make that case. But, functionally, effectively, like, we're not seeing the formation of parties. And if we do, they won't be able to exercise the kind of influence that they do in the traditional system. That's my belief.
Yeah, it's the hang up on this term political parties. What is a political party? And
it's like, no, there are 3 people in a room talking about coordinating. There's a party formed. Like,
exactly.
I have one highlight before that quote, which is, I thought was really a smart observation. Dan says, there is no such thing as a closed system. People will coordinate, outside, inside. You can't trust that everything's happening on a level, and you can't make a system a closed box. So when you design a game theory to tackle, you have to consider all sorts of different challenges.
Yeah. Very good.
And then
well, I think putting this whole no political party, making it impossible for political parties on the court to actually illustrate it rather than just leave it as a assertion. If you form a political party and enter the Eden process, you are relying on having enough rooms that are all in agreement with you, right? It's randomized. So you're on team blue, team red. You choose team blue. You get in a room, the first room that doesn't give you a consensus, a Byzantine number of people who agree with you, you're out. And that whole room, like if you had a majority, that all of those blue people get blown out immediately. So if you're randomized layer after layer, how many layers do you think a team could get through if first round, maybe you get alignment, second round you don't? Maybe you get through 2 rounds of alignment, which would be really unlikely. Third round, you'll be kicked out. Like, you can't just choose your path. It's about consensus. It's not about some line of propaganda.
Well, and look at an actual example from the last trial election. Was it the last one? No, maybe the first one. Anyway, there was like a huge number of, I'm just going to pick on EOS Nation for a second. There's a great team. But they're a team and they're in alignment, and there's many EOS, Eden, EOS Nation people among the Eden membership. So it's kind of, like a natural kind of party, if you will. None of them made it to the final round. So despite the fact that they had every ability, like in terms of numbers, like they have pretty large numbers within, and you can make case. There are other groups that have large numbers, like affinity groups within the Eden process. Like, I don't think, and I'd love to see a network analysis of it too, because it's not like we're any of us are afraid to self-identify with our affinity groups. Like I have, connections to EOS Detroit, and I have connections to, these are just like personal, not professional connections anymore. But I'd love to see how these so-called parties, if you wanted to call them that, actually do in the as the process, goes forward. I haven't seen any advantages yet.
Yeah.
In some case, it's a liability.
It could be, yeah, especially if you're not pervasive enough within the electorate, you might be. And then the other risk of associating yourself with a party is that you associate yourself with all the other people in the party potentially, and then it just takes for one of those. You're kind of the risk of one person screwing up goes up the more people are collected, and then you can get dragged down with them potentially. But we are digressing. So in terms of this book, anything else highlighted here beyond what I've highlighted?
At that point, I think it's worth, let's see here. I highlighted irrational consequences of the party system. And I highlighted, with the party system, the power of any independent politician is nullified. At that bottom of page 17.
Yep, that's good right there.
And then to your point from earlier, Chris, on page 18, I highlighted, given a two-party system, all deliberation and negotiation occurs between the leadership of the parties and not the larger body of representatives. The true leadership is often behind the scenes and unelected. This section, again, like status quo, obviously, like is a lot of ground to cover because we're not just dealing with U.S. politics, and you can find fault with parliamentary systems. With we have the first past the post kind of winner take all two-party system, which is by some reckoning like the most, like the political system that produces the most irrational results of any political system in the world. Where and he highlights it here somewhere where you could vote for like your favorite radical candidate and end up electing the exact opposite person with your vote. So the spoiler effect kind of. Anyway,
I have people must believe that consensus is a true meeting of the minds and not a covert opinion of a minority being presented as a false consensus of the supermajority. This reminds me of Nassim Taleb's minority rule that he describes in his books. And it's another really tough one to squash.
Is that on this page? Is that the next page?
I didn't write down any page numbers. Sorry.
Okay. What's the opening?
People must believe that consensus is a true meeting of the minds. Don't you have a Control F, Chris?
Yeah, I can just find it. People must
believe that consensus is a true meeting.
Oh, hold on.
I'm going to find it for you too, Chris. Just my eyes. Come on.
Luddite.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
I'm going to do this process with a deck of playing cards, and you can't stop me.
I'm in the wrong piece. People must. Okay. I've lost the page. Now I'm going to have to go back down. We'll have to do it the old way. It's not finding it in the PDF search. And now it's frozen. Oh, no. Here we go. Keep scrolling. We'll get there. Maybe we just have to work in order.
That's definitely.
I definitely know the spot you're talking about. I recall reading it. That part I don't know. Anyway, okay. So we were here on this page.
Page 18.
We were on 17. and then we were working our way down. So and we've ended up here, given the two-party system. Yeah, right at the end now. And I will point out, as a Canadian, even a three-party system, or three-ish, it's still the same. The deliberation occurs between the leaderships of the parties and not the people themselves, like the body of the party.
Let's keep going. I haven't gotten to his quote yet, but I have gotten to.
We'll find it.
Yeah, on the way there, I've gotten to both major parties implement selection processes which this book will demonstrate are structurally unable to truly represent the will of the party members, let alone the citizens of the United States.
Is that on page 19?
That's page 9, top of page 19, yeah. Where is that?
Both major parties, here we go, implement selection processes. Very good.
And it's the Simpsons thing.
Go ahead, throw away your vote.
Yeah, that was funny.
Okay, so
That's so
we
good.
should read this then. So an episode of The Simpsons captured the absurdity of our situation. Homer discovers that both presidential candidates are really space aliens. In an effort to save the nation, he crashes a UFO into the Capitol building and then unmasks the aliens on live TV. Everyone in the audience gasps. Then the aliens taunt the people. Yes, it's true. We are aliens. But what are you going to do about it? It's a two-party system. You have to vote for one of us. After a maniacal alien laugh, someone in the audience speaks up and says, I'm going to vote for a third party. The other alien responds, go ahead, throw your vote away. The election proceeds and the people are enslaved to an alien tyranny. In the end, Homer says to his wife, Marge, don't blame me. I voted for the other alien.
Yeah, that was TV genius right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is it in a nutshell.
Where is your quote? Is it in this chapter?
Maybe not.
He made it up.
I just wanted to throw Taleb in here subvertly.
Oh, I see. Yeah, by the end of it, we're just reviewing skin in the game. Well, when did that happen?
This is good, right? So now he's got a quote from John F. Kennedy, who once said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." And
yep,
that's pretty apropos. Where people aren't satisfied with the system. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and then I think he does a really great summary himself of the flaws at the end of the factors that make the two-party system a failure. And then he quotes Einstein in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way. We would have to be insane to keep doing the same things and expecting a different result.
Yeah. So here are the factors that make this so, right? That makes change impossible, basically. So gerrymandering organizes districts so that one party wins every district, removing the influence of minority parties that might have. Media controls the discussion of who is eligible for the masses to consider and what information the masses have available. And that goes back to what we spoke about earlier. How does this get prevented? Even with this system, how does this consensus mechanism affect media? I think that's an open question that we have to figure out. Incumbent advantage, campaign finance that favors celebrities and big spenders, controlled debates, focus on politicians and not policy, ad hominem fallacies, and vote counting corruption. Yeah.
So I already asked Mike, maybe we could write down some sort of summary, like elements that we feel would be really crucial, like elements of this chapter to just convey, even if they're unsubstantiated, like even if we have to ask people to just take it on faith, without any supporting evidence whatsoever, other than the book. Like,
my one-liner would be labeling sows violence.
Labeling sows violence. Yeah, I would say like something like society's, suffers from extreme political division. Just building off that first sentence, and then say that the government we now have is not legitimate in multiple respects, and it does not accurately reflect the will of the people, and therefore we must design a system that makes consensus, like a true consensus, possible. A process that like undermines, the corruption inherent in the party system, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mike,
Yeah.
what was yours again? You were saying like you're either with the status quo or you're with an alternative, or you're like open to alternative.
Yeah. The current system has numerous problems, and you're either for it or you should be open to discussion of alternatives. Kind of drawing a hard line for people.
Mm-hmm.
With us or against us?
Yeah, I mean, in a nice way.
Go ahead, throw your vote away.
It's more like you're either against us or you're willing to talk. Yeah.
Well, you're either with them or
right.
you're willing to talk.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It's such a sad state of affairs. Just your open-mindedness and willingness to talk puts you automatically on the other side.
Yep.
The psychological factors operating are so powerful, the in-group, out-group thing, and the conformity experiment, the Ash conformity experiment is so always in the back of my mind. The one where everyone's in on the experiment except the one person, and they show a series of lines of different lengths on a chart, and they ask which line is most like line A, and there's like 3 other lines, and everyone picks a line that is clearly not the same length as line A. And then the one person who's not in on the experiment will sometimes the first time choose the line, the correct line. But in every repetition, they're less likely to choose the correct line and more likely to go with the group.
Yeah, similar with elevators. There's an elevator thing where everyone's on the experiment facing the wrong way, like facing away from the door.
Oh, and yeah.
The guy walks in and follows them.
Yep. Yeah, you don't want to be the one person standing the opposite way. Like,
right.
It's baked into us, like desire to.
I don't know. I think there's a few of us, this non-conformity piece. I've had this discussion lots with my wife, and it's like, is that something that's just innate? Some of us are just non-conformists. Some of us just do not.
Most of us.
But most are. Yeah. And can you teach non-conformity? Can you teach this idea of being an independent thinker and not following the herd? Or is it just a predisposition that is, it's there. You're not beating it. I don't know. I haven't figured it out whether if it can be taught or not.
I definitely think it can be taught. I've seen some, in my case, homeschooled people, and the level of independent thought is just through the roof. It's amazing, and passing it on to their kids and sharing it with their friends, and it has huge influence.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, the public education system in the U.S. is basically like a
indoctrination camp.
Right, indoctrination for like non-critical thinking.
Which, if you were in charge of a large group of people and you wanted to maintain that control, that seems like a pretty logical way to do it. You make sure that the education program that gets the youngins from a nice early sponge-like stage, and you mold them into the nice little obedient human that many people are. It's not so outlandish. Like, why is that so even a contentious idea? It's surprising to me. Like, why would you not? Have you not played strategy games, like, where you're somewhat combative? If you want to win the game, you got to, like, you manipulate the pieces on the board, suit your interest. It's not rocket science.
So let me take the moment to offer 2 resources. One is John Taylor Gatto. If you're interested in a public school system and you haven't read John Taylor Gatto, you really need to. Gatto. And a documentary on YouTube called The Century of Self. Both well worth checking out.
Priceless. I heartily second The Century of the Self. That is an amazing documentary. It's a long one too, so strap in. It's a 4-part BBC documentary.
Of the self or of self?
Century of the Self.
The self.
That's a great documentary.
And it's historical. This isn't like some kind of conspiracy thing. This is like, just here's how things happened. Like, oh, I had no idea all that history was out there.
Right. It's incontrovertible sort of evidence of, yeah. Like, I'll just bring up one example from the documentary is, like, women didn't smoke in the US. It was taboo. And the tobacco executives were like, how can we get women to smoke? How can we, that's like half the market right there that we're missing out on. And they brought in Edward Bernays, who's, the principal character in this story. And he was Sigmund Freud's nephew. And he was using Freud's ideas to, like, he's basically the father of PR, which was, a euphemism for propaganda, because they didn't want to say propaganda because they were too close to the experiences of Nazi Germany. And they staged an event at this, I think it was the Macy's Day parade in New York City, where all these young debutantes lit up cigarettes in defiance of this taboo and they were carrying placards that said, "Light a torch for freedom." And overnight, the other half of the population started smoking and tobacco sales went through the roof. And it was consciously, done and they equated women smoking with liberation. And then all the advertisements that went with it showing, like, you're an independent woman, you can smoke and all this stuff. And boom, tobacco executives were very happy. And that's just one example of, like, a huge string of ways that the American psyche was manipulated to basically turn them into consumers rather than doers, makers.
It certainly makes it easier to view humans as just a collection of animals. And like, when we do things like that collectively, when we just are sheep-like, like, it just goes to show that if you were a controller and you were willing to, break a few eggs to make an omelet type of thing, the fact that humans just act so animalistic is no wonder we get treated like cattle when we act like cattle.
I think it's what makes this group stand out. Like, we're standing for the respect of the individual. We're standing for, even if you have done stuff that's like that, it's time to stop. Like, there's responsibility to take. And I think this documentary just blows my mind at not so much how people respond, although that is a huge piece of it, but there were a few people, Bernays being a big one, who just had no respect for the individual, like, just zero respect. And he got the right kind of power at the right time, and made a mess. So
yeah, it probably hasn't gone away, right? Like, it's more covert. We're less aware of who the actual string pullers are, but they're certainly aware of the predisposition of humans' ability to sheep it up. In light of wrapping this bad boy up, here we go. So this is a good takeaway. We have to be insane to keep doing the same things and expecting a different result. It is time to implement a new process that considers everyone in the country without bias to the status quo, powers that be, and without corruption of party insiders.
And I just want to highlight a few comments, because we're kind of lazy about the comments, and they don't age well because they're referring to particular things. But we had Lenny said, agree, would be interesting if a member survey on member affiliations and the like. I think he was referring to the Eden membership because I was saying like I have affiliations with Detroit and other people have other affiliations. And then Hetty Eddie said, okay, I have no idea what that means. Okay, well, let's go to the next one. Comes down to the ability of humans to hold a hypothetical. I think it's the ability to consider that teacher is showing something the human doesn't yet see. Take that as you will. That was from 1025, so the 3 minutes ago.
Lenny has confirmed it was Eden.
Right. It was this one. I was like, has a great section on this difference between humans versus monkeys learn. I was like, wait, what are we talking about? Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. They don't trust. Anyway.
All right.
Well,
in light of wrapping this up in some sort of coherent manner.
Coherent manners.
Thank you, everybody, for watching who has watched. And to those who are watching after the live stream, hopefully you got something out of this. We will be doing this every week at the same time.
We'll get better. We'll get better. I promise.
Oh, yeah.
And go ahead. I just wanted to say real quick that I would like for homework for us to take these notes and try to like each of us come up with, I mean, collectively we should be able to produce some sort of summation, a text summation that we all can kind of get down with. So maybe we can either do it in the OneNote area, and then, you know, if you guys have, we have a chat open for anyone that participates in the panel here. So Mike, I don't know if you're in there yet, but it's on Slack if you can handle another venue for chatting.
Oh no.
Slack that.
We can do it wherever, but yeah, just it'd be nice to produce some sort of concise summary that no one here disagrees with, and everyone feels like it's inclusive of what they feel is important, and then we can have a discourse about that.
I have a meeting at the bottom of the hour. Thanks so much, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate you creating the opportunity. Catch you guys later.
Yeah.
Thanks
Later,
everybody
Mike.
for listening.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'll do is I will certainly take all the highlighted notes. I'm going to just kind of type them into just one solid thing. And it almost like it's a separate thing to read. Is it coherent to then read all the highlighted notes in sequence and make sense of it? And maybe that's where we can then take that written piece and then massage it so it is actually coherent as a summary of sorts. And then for next week, for those who want to follow along, we are going to be reading True Democracy, the chapter True Democracy. We're trying to do roughly 20 pages. That's 18 pages. So without breaking into the next chapter, which is the rules of relative power, I think we just focus on that chapter, True Democracy, for next week.
Cool.
Sounds
great. We'll work out all the other details offline. Thanks for everybody that showed up.
Yeah.
And the people that will yet to show up.
Hope you enjoy. Until next
Yes,
week.
fine, guys. Thanks.
Yep. And away we go.